right, let's give it a couple more minutes. It looks like we still have some folks rolling in. I'm just looking, do we have Stacy here yet? Looks like the alderman said to give us 1 minute, so. All right, everybody, I think we can get started. Welcome to today's event. It is Not Tomorrow Now, CPD Out of CPS. It's sponsored by 40th United and also co-sponsored by 48th Ward Neighbors for Justice. I thought I would start us off with like just a common understanding, right? We're in a moment now across this country. It's a second civil rights movement. Let's be real, right? And in this moment, we have folks calling to defund the police. We have folks calling to abolish the police. And meanwhile, while that conversation is happening all across the country, Chicago remains to be the only city that has not taken any action whatsoever to defund police in our city. All of that being said, right, we still have police officers in our schools across the city. Northside College Prep in the 40th Ward just had their LSC vote to remove their police officer from their school. So we're taking some particular pride on that in the 40th Ward. And all of that being said, we have some wonderful guests on the panel today, and I'm going to introduce each one. We have pre-submitted questions. Please do not unmute yourself in order to ask your question. The pre-submitted questions are going to be the questions that we ask our guests and panelists first. If you do have any questions, please submit them in the chat, and our secretary, Heather, will flag me down and say, slow your roll, dude. We got a question in the chat, and have it at an appropriate time there. So one by one, I am going to introduce our guests and give them 2 to 3 minutes to speak their truth to power on why they believe cops should be out of CPS schools. The first person I'm going to introduce is our Alderman, Alderman Andre Vasquez. Alderman?
Hey, how's it going, Devin? Hi, everybody. Happy Sunday. Um, it's really interesting that we would need 2 to 3 minutes to explain to people why we don't want police in schools, but I'll try to make the most of that time. I just ask, I always start with the same question with everybody I speak to, and that is to like remember what it was like when you were in school. If you recall officers like hanging out in the hallways or being pulled over by an officer or talked, and I don't recall any of that. You have security guards, which are there to kind of serve the same function. And when we already have enough issues as it pertains to the Chicago Police Department, the lack of accountability, the misconduct, it just for me it's a little baffling that it's even viewed as the right idea as far as maintaining school safety. Um, so yeah, I'm been firmly against it. And I think after listening to the Inspector General's hearings on the program itself, even more so. So I'm just glad to be here with everybody else and want to hear everyone's take as we talk through this. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Alderman. The next person I am going to introduce is the Executive Director of Vote 16 Illinois. He is a wonderful student organizer, Caleb DeBerry. Caleb, thanks for being here.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm Caleb DeBerry. I'm the Executive Director of Vote 16 Illinois. I do a lot of organizing outside of that with high school Democrats, with One Northside, other community organizations. And I'm also a student at Northside College Prep. So I'm really proud of my school for voting to remove the SROs. I really just want to kind of echo what Alderman Vasquez said, because we also have security at our school. And the security at my school, they know us, they know our names, they scan us in for IDs, they give us the extra food that the lunchroom isn't serving anymore if we're still hungry. But we had two officers, I can't remember off the top of my head, who, we had never interacted with. And it was super disconcerting, to me, to a lot of the other people of color, and really just like all of the kids at our school, to see somebody, like with a gun on their hip, just kind of sitting in the lobby, and for us, the officers didn't do anything at Northside, and that is really the best case scenario for officers at any school. Because at a lot of schools, the officers also handle disciplinary matters. And that's, of course, a terrible feeling to have over your head when you're a student just trying to get an education, and you have officers, you don't get sent to the principal's office, you get sent to maybe the police, not station, but their offices at the school. It's just a super, I'm really excited that, Northside was the first school to do this, and we've seen Clemente and other schools like Lane Tech and Oak Park River Forest starting to de-police, and it's really, really great to see. But yeah.
Thank you for that, Caleb, and thanks for joining us. The next person who I am going to introduce is a parent organizer for Raise Your Hand for Illinois Public Education, Natasha Erskine.
Good afternoon. It's good to see so many beautiful faces on here. Listen, I'm a proud CPS parent. I'm a K through 12 CPS alum. I went to CPS in the 80s and 90s where I saw and I became an over-police youth. So I come to this with a passion because I had that experience, and why are we still talking about this in 2020? And really, how I've always been outspoken about police not being the answer in schools, particularly when it comes to Black children, Latinx children, any student who comes from a marginalized community, and then oftentimes we see that play out along the class lines. And it is because as an LSE parent rep, more recently, what lit a fire in me was watching an administrator use police as her personal security. There's media out there where you can read about how the young people describe their school feeling like a jail. And it was hurtful. And again, it brought back some of those experiences that I've had previously, right? And so I'm here, now as like a strong ally of the youth-led police-free school coalition, because they're telling these stories, right? And I remember as a LSC parent rep asking CPS, like, hey, the principal is over exceeding her authority, and so are the cops in the building. And they didn't do anything, right? And so when I listened to City Council's, brief, earlier in the month, and I heard the Inspector General detail the lack of oversight, the missed opportunities to improve, right? It took a federal consent decree for us to get to this point where they're half baking reform. We are far beyond reform. We must see that this is a failed process. We need to get into the mindset, just like we did with mass incarceration, right? And the war on all these things, and see that police and schools are an extension of that. Again, 4 young Black boys were taken out of the school in handcuffs. So I understand now the classroom to prison pipeline. And again, as a strong ally with the Police Free Schools Coalition, and hearing them talk about the numbers and how this is impacting them and how they feel less safe, just being here because of what this is entitled, and what, I understand people are starting to understand, and other local school councils are starting to really examine school safety in a real way. So I'm happy to be here to share my thoughts and my voice with you all here today. So I, have a lot to say, but I'm looking forward to questions to be able to, dig a little bit deeper on those experiences. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Natasha. Next up, we have a former CPS teacher and a former CPS principal, Tomas Rivolo. Tomas, can you give 2 to 3 minutes on your opinion on just introductory CPD and CPS?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I've also been a parent LSC member, a teacher LSC member, and now I work with the grandchildren at a public high school. But as a principal, the main thing is this. We created a restorative justice system in our school. I was a principal for 14 years. And the main thing that we try to fix is this whole issue of law and order. It's zero tolerance, and there was just no patience for the kids, and we needed to create a safe haven for them. It was beyond education. It was about their health, their physical and mental health. It was about training everyone who worked there. It was really restoring what I call the school community, which includes the parents, the community, all the services in the area, the business community. And when you have that in place, you do not need the police inside the building. No child, whether they're children of color, whether they're disadvantaged, no one should be seeing the police in that building. There are other things that we can all do, and we must do it, and we must train people to do this. So welcome, everybody.
Thank you for that, Tomas. And next up, I'm going to introduce the Chicago Teachers Union Vice President, Stacy Davis Gates.
Stacy Davis Gates, who cannot get it together this Sunday. I am so sorry. Greetings. I appreciate your patience with me and my lack of clear technology in this moment. I'll get it together, promise. Look, your first 2 speakers, there's nothing left to say. I mean, I am a high school history teacher. I'm a mother of 3 Chicago public school students. What I will say is that there are 2 different schools that my children go to. And the one that my son attends has a cop. The one that my girls attend, they do not have a cop. And so the rhetoric that's out there is that schools that do not have police officers are unsafe. I reject that. In fact, I would say that the climate and the culture at the school my girls attend is very welcoming. It's very warm, and it is safe. I would challenge anyone to say anything different. But this is systemic. this is not just about my personal experience with those two schools or my personal experience as a classroom teacher. This is about the data. And the data is very clear in what it's telling us. The data says that children are not safe, and that it quickens their relationship, which it's a bad relationship with law enforcement. And so if we are creating school communities to address the needs of children, and in the Chicago public schools, 90% of the children are children of color, coming from Black families, Latinx families, immigrant families. And so we have to be clear about the interactions that immigrant families have with law enforcement, Latinx families have with law enforcement, and Black families have with law enforcement. We have to be clear about the types of policies that we are putting together to ensure their safety, to ensure that they are having a positive academic experience. We were on strike for 11 days last fall because we said that we have to do school differently. It wasn't just that we were on strike. If we are really clear about what the strike is about, it's about reimagining the ways in which we encounter our children and what we offer them. We're not offering them nurses in every school, as we are encountering a pandemic and hearing Donald Trump say, like, just put them back in school. But we do have cops in schools. We are not in a situation where the trauma that our students are dealing with regard to COVID and the sustained amount of gun violence in the city, they're not being addressed either. We have to begin to find value in children of color. We have to begin not just saying it with our mouths, providing lip service to it, but formulating policies, making decisions that reflect those values. And so what I would say for the Chicago Teachers Union, our work is manifold. I mean, obviously, we are all for providing safe spaces for our students, removing cops from our schools, but it doesn't just stop there. It has to be reimagining the school community that, number one, provides resources, support, and development for teachers and all school personnel. So you don't see a cop as a disciplinarian. That's number one. Number two, creating spaces where we are evaluating and confronting our implicit bias. Look, we live in a society founded on white supremacy. We live in a society founded on patriarchy. To say that we don't have those things and that we don't wrestle with those things as adults is a lie, because it is. And so that. And then finally, we are also clear about the work that we're going to have to do to create a space that imagines our children as scholars, as academics, as students, as people, as human beings, and what that means in terms of the curriculum we put together, what that means in terms of how we encounter them on a daily basis. So the work is both external in the organizing space and the communication space, but it is also internal in how we prepare educators to confront the reality of this society. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Tomas, you mentioned previously restorative justice. And as a eighth grade educator myself, I fully understand what that means. And I've seen restorative justice in action in the school that I work in. Can you explain for everybody the concept of restorative justice and what that means and what that looks like in a school?
Well, the basic thing is that you're creating a safe haven for the students, all students, of every kind of student. So when something occurs in the school, it's sort of old-fashioned to go punitive right away. You got to get that kid. And restorative justice is about working with that student, having the student talk about what are the things that he or she is feeling. Maybe not at that very second when he's all excitable, but it's a program where you work with the students. Eventually you have students talking with each other and really coming out with what is it that they're feeling at that moment. And like Stacy said, in some schools, they just get sent to the police that are in the schools. And that's why the culture has to change. And eventually there has been plenty of studies where students have said, this is the first time I've been allowed to speak my mind without being told that I'm missing English class or I'm missing history class. The bottom line is our kids are not ready to be learning anything. You know, they're missing their breakfast. Some of them are coming from very tough homes and neighborhoods. So what restorative justice is all about is focusing on their mental health and their physical health before we can even bother or try to start the educational part.
Thank you for that, Tomas. Yeah, personally, I've seen some absolutely wonderful conversations being had between students, teachers, just wonderful conflict resolution.
And they're so inspiring. I mean, they really inspire the teachers. They inspire me as a principal.
Absolutely. I have a question that was submitted from a 40th Ward neighbor, and I'm going to direct it towards Caleb and Natasha. And the question is, how can student and parents work together to make sure that we have police removed from schools just like we saw Northside College Prep, how that played out? Caleb, I'll let you go first.
Thank you. When it comes to, I mean, obviously I'm more inclined towards the student side. I work with a lot of people that, you know, we all advocate for student voice. And so a few alumni from our school, in fact, from Vote 16 as well, actually organized a lot of the Northside alumni to come to our LSC meeting to explain to the parents, to the teachers, to the students, everybody on the call, why having police in schools are such a bad idea, talking about their own experiences back when they were a student there. I think that, and, you know, it was super great being able to, you know, see those people again, but also just like see how much they were still connected with our community. And I think really what is just the most important is making sure that, you know, there's listening to be had on both sides. I think everybody on the board, I think even if they were disagreeing at first, I think kind of warmed up to the idea, except for one person that abstained on the vote. But I think that really just being able for both sides to listen to the other person's concerns and then being able to, you know, kind of ease those concerns, I think was the main thing. And of course, if Natasha has any other, you know, further ideas on this, yeah.
Barely, you covered it. And so our job, as I understand the question, is how can students and parents work together to achieve wins like Caleb and the young people, is to listen to young people. And what they're saying right now is justified and it's righteous. Here we are in what feels like the very beginning of a righteous outrage nationally and globally for Black liberation, for poor people's liberation, for all marginalized peoples, right? The young people are talking about this and they're putting, as they call it, receipts on this work. So I encourage parents and families and local school councils to go to copsoutcps.com. And the Police Free School Coalition has data, research, national best practices that consistently and repeatedly talk about how communities are working together and showing examples of, really, right? And so when we look at other cities like Minneapolis, Denver, Oakland, it was the strong collaboration of parents and their young people talking about wanting safety for their children. So, you know, we've always done this. I just think we need to put the pins in when it comes to this particular subject and refine what we already know, that every parent wants their child and their peers to be safe at school. And so the reimagining that Stacey Davis Gates mentioned is where now we have to talk about, like, this hasn't worked. And so coming up and listening to the young people who are saying, we want counselors, we want mentors, we want therapists because we're going through a lot. Those are the things that we should be asking for at the local school council table. It's not that hard, right? So again, I could go on, but I'm going to leave it there so that we can continue to discuss. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that. This next question, I was going to point to Alderman Vasquez and Stacey Davis Gates, and I'm going to preface it with my own experience. I work as an educator in Skokie in a very well-funded school. We have 3 school counselors for a student population of 750 students. Unfortunately, we also have a police officer in our school. The number that's been thrown around in Chicago is that we've been spending $33 million a year on having police in our schools, where Chicago schools don't have near the amount of resources that schools like the school that I teach at in Skokie do, right? So Alderman Vasquez and Stacy, can you speak to where you see this $33 million being better spent?
Literally anywhere. So just come on, like, thank you for the question. But when we think about the fact that the teachers had to strike for almost 2 weeks to just get one counselor, one nurse in the schools, and for whatever promises get made in the agreement, still haven't been meeting that goal, right? That's like bare minimum. Or the fact that we're still in this city, there's still folks talking about schools opening, and I don't believe we've actually seen a plan as to what safety looks like. So when we talk about public safety, how about public health? And the fact that we're going to send kids into buildings where the class sizes were already too big for the rooms. So there's literally plenty of other places where those funds can go. And it's all the more reason why we're making the case when we are talking in city council, or when, we call the Board of Ed, that it needs to go. Like, it's not even a fair premise, because typically the LSCs are offered either take it or leave it. If they were given the opportunity to take those funds and invest them elsewhere, I don't think you'd get the same results as far as which ones would actually want schools. So literally anywhere, there is a laundry list, and a laundry list is short, of the things you could invest money in to make the schools better without even talking about police. So yeah, I'll let Stacy can totally go into more detail, but I think that's, anywhere else would be better than having them go to cops in school.
I think Alderman Vasquez is hitting it right on the head, literally everything else. But what I will say is that, my world has been upside down as a parent, even with the consideration of my children going back into their school communities in September. And what I am confronted with, because, I have privilege, if you will, that like most parents in the city of Chicago that send their children to the Chicago public schools don't have enough agency. Like, we've been beating that drum for a very long time that we need an elected representative school board. We need our LSCs treated equitably across the city, because there's a fallacy that LSCs everywhere have the same authority, and they don't. We know if a school is on probation, that LSC is advisory, that they don't have the vote, that they don't have the vote that folks keep telling us that they have, right? And so what I would say is that a few things. $33 million to spend on social emotional supports, yes. And how are we reforming school communities? But how are we reforming school communities to address specifically the needs that are happening in this moment? Natasha said we have students telling us what they need. We know that our high school students were frontline workers during this pandemic. They were in grocery stores, making sure that families had what they needed. So if you can work during a pandemic that is literally killing people across the globe, then I can listen to you when you tell me what school policy needs to look like. That's one. Number two, the agency of families, Black families, brown families, immigrant families need to be put to the fore. And then finally, the distribution of resources is not just with that $33 million. It's also with student-based budgeting that provides most of our schools with less than what they need, because the budgeting scheme is inequitable and has racist implications. So that being said, I would like to see, if we have a priority list, I would like to see our schools cleaner, because we're going to need that. I would like to see our schools have smaller class sizes. I would like to see our schools be staffed up immediately to meet the healthcare needs that our school communities will encounter in the short term. It's not just this school year, but it will be in the short term. Our world is different, and our institutions, our policymakers, our decision makers have to clarify what that means and make decisions and appropriations to respect that.
Thank you for that. This seems to be a question that people are kind of chomping at the bit to answer. I'm gonna let Caleb. Can you speak to where you would see that money going towards in your school?
Well, I know that everybody already kind of brought up putting it in mental and emotional wellness programs, and I think that that would be, in my school in particular, I think that that would be where it could be best used. Well, not necessarily just in my school. We have a decent, I mean, compared to the rest of CPS, we definitely have, I would say, better health programming. We have a social worker about 3 days a week, I believe, and we have a psychologist that we split with Mather, I believe. But I think every school deserves a full-time social worker, a full-time psychologist, because there are, as Ms. Gates said, like we have students out there on the front lines battling, working and also having. There's just a lot going on right now, obviously, and we're going to need to help our students along and kind of figuring this out in our emotional development. And, everybody deserves to have a clean bill of mental health. And so I think every school really just needs more social workers, more therapists, I don't have anything else to add.
Thank you for that, Caleb. Natasha, as a parent, where would you like to see that money going?
Yeah, there are national best practices and how we can also use this as a mentorship opportunity. I have, a real concern about the lack of, we're very quick to punish young people. So when we're talking about that money, it can be used to train them on how to handle conflict, right? And have peer-to-peer supports where we grow past this. It's really not that difficult. But listen, some of the schools, I did a little bit of research because I was curious about the schools who were, fighting to maintain their SROs. And when I look at their available menu of educational options, they're limited. And I'm sitting back like, how is that possible? So I like to see that money fund engineering classes, fund CTE. I'd like to see, where we prioritize that education. If we don't educate our young people, we'll continue to have the local economy that we have, where over half, I think the percentage was over 50% of young Black men, 19 to 25 or 4, are not in school, didn't graduate school, and unemployed or underemployed. That has an implication of the violence that we see here in Chicago. So again, if we don't fund and take serious that and prioritize education over the school to prison pipeline, I think we'll continue to pay for it in dire consequences from a public safety perspective.
Thank you for that, Natasha. I have a question, and this is from another 40th Ward resident, for Tomas. What is your response to those who argue that CPD presence in schools is necessary because of potential school shootings, students with weapons, students becoming violent?
Well, going back to my original thoughts of having a transformative culture in your building, there's nothing that police inside the school would affect that. I mean, obviously, in a situation like they happen across this country at that very second, at that very moment, obviously that would come in handy. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about every single day, 10 hours a day, because those schools are the centers of the children's lives. So we're talking about every single day of transformative actions by the staff, by the entire community. So one that really has nothing to do with the other.
Thank you for that. Let's see, we have another question from Margot in 48th Ward, and it is for Alderman Vasquez and Ms. Gates. It's can you explain the connection between an elected school board, a fight for an elected school board, and cops out of CPS?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Oh, sorry, Stacey, you can go first if you want.
well, I mean, I think it's kind of obvious is that, you know, the discussion from the fifth floor and CPS has been allow parents at the local school council level to make those decisions. What they don't tell us is that local school councils have been overly disenfranchised because of the school rating policy. The school rating policy impacts whether or not you're on probation, if you're slated for closure, if you're deemed failing. And what it does is inhibit the work of the LSC to make, you know, concrete decisions with respect to who gets to lead the school, how the dollars that the school does receive, how they're allocated. That being said, we're the only school district in the state of Illinois that is controlled by the city's mayor. That's it. We have to get to the point like unpacking all of these generations of decisions that have been made to encumber the rights of people of color. I mean, because that's ultimately what it is. Because decisions are made for us, decisions are not made with us, decisions are made against us, decisions are not made for us. And what we see in Chicago is a vestige of that with respect to our public school system. Look, there is one thing that I'm tracking very closely is that the voting rights of Black people in this country are always imperiled, be it a long line at the voting location, or be it the fact that you have to re-up your, you know, ability to vote because they're purging people from it, or here in Chicago where you can be taxed for the schools in your community, but you have zero say about the policies and the decisions that are made at those schools. Look, you know, the word racist is being used a lot. The word white supremacy is being used a lot. The word patriarchy is being used a lot in these moments. And it's rightfully so that they're being used. What we have to begin to do is connect it to the bigger systems, not just to the murals that people are painting in the streets, but to the bigger systems of white supremacy and how they marginalize us. Decisions are being made. And those decisions are being made that impact the school community or school district that is 90% students of color. You know, get rid of it. If we can elect the mayor, if we can elect aldermen, if we can elect senators, representatives at the state level, at the federal level, if we can elect the president, and God bless us, let's get rid of this one. If we can do all of those things, why can't we have say over what's happening with our students in the Chicago public schools? It's antiquated and it has to go.
Yeah, I think what I'd add to that is, for me, it's particularly disingenuous when, now that the LSCs are the ones making the decisions for police and schools, now they're the duly elected bodies that we all need to be respecting. But if you were to try to find out when your LSC is having a meeting, are they live streaming it? Are they providing notes? Do they have the same level of transparency and accountability one would want from an elected position? No, it's a challenge just to even get that information. So it is very interesting when it's framed really by the executive branch, by the mayor, to say, oh, this is the respected duly elected body, but let's not do that for the elected school board because that's too unwieldy, right? Like, that's, when you think about that, you kind of see that people pick and choose what argument they want to make. And another example of why we want an elected board of education is by looking at how the vote for CPD out of CPS went. It was a 4-3 vote in favor of keeping the police in schools. And I bet if any of those people sitting in those seats had to like run and keep those seats, they would have different answers because they would then be held accountable by the people they're representing. And they don't have that vested interest right now. They have to basically placate to one person to make sure they meet whatever result that person wants to see. And that's just how it plays out. So, you know, that's the thing that was interesting to me when we were talking about this contract, that this focus on the LSC being this duly elected body. Well, so is the city council. And as the, you know, those who have the fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers of the city, yeah, it's on us to end the contract on our side because it's not the best use of funds, especially when we see that this year we're having a $700 million budget hole and we're looking at a north of $1 billion deficit coming in for the next year. So a lot of things sound really well when it comes to communications and the optics and the memes and the tweets and whatever you want to frame it as. But if you really want to dig in as somebody that has to be responsible for this budget, it is absolutely irresponsible to not look at something like that 33 million and say it's better allocated somewhere else.
Thank you for that, Alderman. This question is from a 40th Ward resident, and it is for Caleb. The questioner asks, since your school has had an SRO for your tenure up until now, how have the cops been utilized in the school, if at all? Do students see them as a resource or a threat?
Thanks so much for that question. We don't interact with the police at all. Like, truly, we have never, I mean, from what I've heard, they've been used for like extra security at prom or from other school events, but that's not them necessarily volunteering. That is the school paying them to show up and act as security. We have not really, I don't really know a student that, has ever really interacted with the police officers. And that is, in a way, a blessing because, the people that I know that don't go to my school that have had to interact with the police, it's scary, having, especially for people that look like me, where interacting with a cop can be deadly at times. It's extremely disconcerting to just have to keep that in the back of your head that, while you're trying to pay attention in geometry, that there is just somebody in your school with a gun that could basically do anything they want at any time. And so, yeah, we haven't had a significant use for our police officers, which is why I'm glad the LSC decided to retire their usage or lack thereof in favor of just keeping our security that, knows us, cares about us, all that. Yeah.
Thank you, Caleb. Natasha, as a parent with your ears to the ground, have you heard of how SROs are utilized in your children's schools or any local schools around you?
Yeah, I, very involved parent, just at the school, not just local school council. Now I'm in a position where trying to encourage and influence parents and community members to run. So, we've hosted, meetings. We've talked about this on several occasions. And what continues to come up is we're going to follow the youth. And so when you listen to them and you tell them their stories, and then you remember, also being engaged as a parent, or I should say their stories keep reflecting me to my experiences in the school. So I've seen, 2 police officers who, by the way, between them have over 60 complaints, some substantiated, some several suspensions. So it's confirmed that the 2 that are in the school should not be there. So I think between them, they make $170,000 a year, right? And so they sit in an office, and what we get for that $170,000 is at the end of the school day, they block the lane and the traffic so that the CTA buses can pull up in front of the school. It is a waste of funds that should be used for something else. The interaction with young people has been negative. I was, 2 last points. There was a emergency school drill that went horribly wrong. One, because the young people didn't know what to do, where they were supposed to go and how to block or whatever, but they were, given very harsh words from the CPD officers in the building who helped execute this emergency drill. And it was like, my question was, well, why, there was ways that you could talk to them and say, hey, this is what you did, but this is what you should have done. So, from my experience, I've consistently seen them miss opportunities to be whoever CPS thinks that they're going to be in these schools, right? These are the same people who have a very condescending tone when they talk to parents, right? When we had that administrator who was using them as her personal security, they became an extension of her nastiness. right? And so not just from like how children are saying, I've observed everything that students are saying, and I put my name to the fact that what you're getting at some schools is not what young people are getting over here on the South Side. And that is why this is morally wrong. This is why it exceeds authority, and it is a violation of their civil rights, right? And so until we can start to see the correlation between what students are talking about, their school performance, their experiences, and their harm, I think we continue to put them in a space where I think we're just failing the young people because they've been telling us their stories and we should believe them.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, a couple questions from the chat, if you have a sec.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So there's some buzz in the chat. Sorry, I didn't see who asked originally. So the money, that $33 million, assuming that enough LSCs or all the schools vote to remove teachers from the schools, where does that money go? Because it sounds like it's not going to go to the school. The school doesn't get to keep that money.
It goes back to the central office budget, and they get to decide what to do with it. So this whole concept of agency at the local school council level is an illusion at best. And at worst, it's a lie, because if I say no to the SRO, then however many dollars are allocated for that SRO, then that money goes back into the central office budget. And it doesn't automatically mean that those dollars get back to that school community in any substantive manner.
Thank you for that.
And then in terms of the school board, the mayor is an advocate for an appointed school board. Is it an option for city council to vote to make it an elected school board? Where is the ultimate power for change in how the school board is designed?
Yeah, that's typically that's state law. So if that, as Stacy mentioned, right, we're the only city in the state that doesn't have it. And typically why that is because although it can be done at the state level, they tend to defer to mayors to kind of go in whatever direction the mayor would want it to go. And so the way it played out with Mayor Lightfoot is, as she was running, when it was candidate Lightfoot, she was for the elected school board. Once she got elected, there was already a bill that was moving in the General Assembly to try to get an elected school board. She was asked about it, and what she said was that the number of members, which I believe would have been 21 to be fully representative of different populations in the city, that was too unwieldy, and that's why she wasn't in support of it. And since then, basically that conversation has been tabled. What is interesting is it's kind of gotten new life because of the CPD out of CPS issue, because once people saw what the appointed board did as far as voting for it, all of a sudden it's like, oh, thanks for reminding me, we need that elected school board right now. And so I think, for how better things could be, at the very least, it does provide an opportunity to have that conversation and actually get the change we want and get people reignited to keep pushing for it.
And call your state senators. The bill is still alive. I think the House and the State House has voted on it 3 times. It's always been a problem in the state Senate. They're under new leadership now. So I would suggest that everyone in Chicago call your state senators and say Chicago needs an elected representative school board, and the bill is still alive.
All right, we have a question from a 40th Ward resident for Tomas. Tomas, in your experience as a school principal, what does a sensible school security look like?
Well, what we did in our school is when they gave us an opportunity to have security, it was not a CPD person, it was someone trained. But what we did is we put that person again through the transformative restorative justice process. And it was really wonderful because yes, he took care of some things that we needed taken care of, mostly the safety coming in from the outside, but in the inside, he spent all the time with the children. And that was really wonderful. They really needed another adult that they could relate to. So it has to be someone who becomes part of the school community. And that is a real big thing. You cannot separate that in little pieces. It has to be one program everywhere. I wanted to mention something about LSCs. I was an LSC teacher, I was an LSC parent, and of course an LSC principal. Here's the deal, the LSC do not get to vote to get the SROs in or out. The LSCs have been given the right to approve supplemental funding that they're using to pay the SROs. That's a big difference. The mayor's office is not explaining it that way. They're making it sound like it's on you. So like my neighborhood high school is struggling with that because so far they voted to approve SROs, which is Amundsen High School. The LSCs can only approve or disapprove at the request of an official vote from the principal to approve or disapprove the expenditure of that money. And that is a complete different way of looking at it. I just want to make sure I mentioned that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And let's see. So I don't want to run too long on time. So I think what we're going to do here is give everybody 2 or 3 minutes to give their closing thoughts and make any plugs that they want to make. So Caleb, I'm going to let you go first.
Thank you. So yeah, you kind of, if you're here at the beginning, you kind of heard about all of the things I do. I work with Vote 16 Illinois, trying to lower the voting age in municipal elections. So 16, 17-year-olds can have a voice on criminal justice, environmental policy, education policy if you live outside of the city of Chicago, because you can elect your school boards literally everywhere else in Illinois. So if you want to check that out, feel free to go on our website, vote16il.com, or .org, I'm sorry. And then besides that, I just want to make one more pretty tiny point. I was reading through a lot of these articles about Northside removing SROs and Clemente removing them as well. And a lot of the comments in kind of support of keeping the cops are all very much like, oh, but what about school shooters? We need to protect our students and their young, brilliant minds and all of those kinds of things. And you would see that when you're reading about Northside. But then when you look at Clemente, it's just like, well, I guess that everybody at Clemente is just going to join a gang now. You know, we tried our best. And, you know, it's just a truly terrible thing to hear. And I mean, I don't think that cops belong in any school. And I don't think, I feel like I'm preaching a little bit to the choir here on this call, but just, you know, if they were only consistent with their arguments, that would make them at least a little bit more, maybe a little bit more articulate in their point. But yeah, truly, thank you guys for having me. I appreciate all the work that you all do. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Caleb. Natasha, any closing remarks, plugs that you want to make?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for hosting this platform. I've learned a lot. Caleb, you represented today, and it's just a reminder of what I've been saying this whole time. So I just really want to plug Cops Out of CPS, copsoutcps.com, which is a youth-led police-free coalition. It is not new. They've been doing this for years. Nationally, this has been going on for over a decade because all of the research and all of the data, like Stacey mentioned, points to this is a bad deal. And I think that we need to be expeditious about removing cops out of school. I know that there's another opportunity for City Council and the board to vote on this. I believe it's going to be on the board's agenda in August. We implore them to make the right decision. I understand that they are under duress by the person that appointed them, but you know, we are the people who are saying we need them to keep our children that attend these schools safe and in a real way. So the pressure of, you know, young people were out in the streets. I think that parents should see that this is an opportunity to, you know, wherever, you know, they feel comfortable to start joining them. I think there can be, until there's justice in this space, there can be no peace. And so if you see the young people organizing, join them. If you're not out for that, deliver and drop off a case of water while they're out there standing up for what they believe in. So again, thank you for this opportunity to speak. And then, you know, the last thing, and I want to mention the local school councils, some of which are not fully empowered. And so there are best practices of local school councils here over on the South Side. You know, there's an opportunity for growth, right? They are not sharing all of the information, and in some cases are calling these schools with intimidation. I won't call it full out intimidation, but making it uncomfortable for those schools to make a decision that is against keeping cops in schools. So I want to mention that LSEs have a duty to reach out and understand what's happening and what the young people are actually asking for, and then look at the national best practices and some of the resolutions that the other states passed really shine light on. We can't separate the SROs from the Chicago Police Department, who is under a federal consent decree for violating our constitutional and civil rights, period. And so if we don't take, our local folks that are calling for this, look at what's happening across the nation and let that be the guide. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. Really appreciate you. Then next, I'm going to let Tomas give his closing remarks and make any plugs that he wants to make.
Yeah, what kind of plugs? Like 40th United? The bottom line is this. As Natasha said it so well, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are best practices going on all over this country. There are amazing stuff going on. The youth of today are so motivated, ready to go at any level. Just get them near their computer and their phone and they fly away. What I've been doing the last 8 years is mentoring future teachers and mentoring new principal. One of my first mentees just got a principalship in Oak Park. And what we do is we spend time every single day talking about exactly what we're talking about here, because the principals can affect the culture of any school. And the other thing is we have to stand up. I recall as a principal getting calls from my superintendent saying, we don't want to see you in the news anymore. And I said, no, I'm not breaking any laws. I'm not saying anything I'm not supposed to, but because I am here to inspire the kids. That's what I'm here for. So let's keep doing it. Let's just continue to do what we're doing right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Tomas. Alderman Vasquez, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this time kind of flew by. So I want to just cover some things to make sure people have them, because as Caleb rightfully pointed out, we're kind of preaching to the choir here. So I want to make sure that people are equipped when they're talking to folks who don't agree with us. So their Inspector General in 2017 actually investigated the whole program. And in that time found out they didn't have a roster of who those officers were. There was no memorandum of understanding of what the mission of the actual program was. There was no evaluation, no hiring process, no way to track anything, no way to figure out if there were interactions between officers and students without anybody else around. There was zero as far as that. That was in 2017. So after the findings of that Inspector General's report, there were about 8 recommendations made. The program committed to try to get that done by the 2019-2020 year. Spoiler alert, didn't happen. In 2018, there was a follow-up investigation. Out of all the recommendations that were made, the only one that they were able to do was to get a roster of the officers. And even then, they can't get it in a digital spreadsheet. This is where $33 million are appropriated to. So when it comes to talking people who don't agree with you, you don't have to talk about the ideological. Talk about how the lack of seriousness of people who are actually implementing that program, that even under investigation, we're not able to meet those expectations and still haven't. When we had the hearing 2 weeks ago, I asked simple questions. How much do the officers get paid? How do you track the interactions? How many officers have had complaints, either before when they got made in SROs or during school? You know how many answers we got? Zero on all of those. If they were that serious about the program, they would actually do something about it and have the basic fundamental answers as to why it's even in place. So you can have that conversation any day of the week with everyone. And that contract will be up. August 31st is when it ends. So July 22nd is when the Board of Education will be voting on the next contract for CPD out of CPS. So my plug would be to reach out to all those men on the board, because all the women on the board voted the right way. So you reach out to all the other men, the 4 of them, that did not vote in that direction, and add the public pressure necessary to move it. That would be my plug. Thank y'all very much.
Thank you, Alderman. Ms. Gates, any final thoughts or plugs?
Couple of things. Shouts out to Artemis Vasquez and the 40th Ward organization. You all are, making this accessible to, the masses. And I really appreciate your leadership on this and, the statement of solidarity that you have with the young people in this moment. I think I'm going to use my time to just say that as a high school teacher, watching, listening to, observing and being led by young people in this moment is the best thing that has happened in the last 4 months. To see their strength, their courage, their clarity, their ability to communicate across purposes has just been everything for me. One, our world is going to be okay because they are clarifying the point of the future. And so I think it would be a good exercise for everyone to learn to listen to young people, respect the voices of Latinx youth, respect the voices of Black youth, respect the voices of immigrant youth. These people are telling us, what it feels like in this moment and what we are responsible for as adults in this moment. And so listen to them, be guided by them. If we can say that the children are our future, use all these cliches to make different decisions in our world, we can certainly do it when they are as clear as they are. And so I just thank them. I thank them for their leadership. I thank them for their courage.
Thank you, Ms. Gates. And thank you to all of our guests, our panelists today. I have learned a lot. I'm sure many other people have as well. We've had some wonderful input from students, parents, politicians, and this has just been like an absolutely wonderful moment. But let's get this right. Let's not waste this moment, right? So what I'm going to do is right now I'm throwing up in the chat, and I'm going to keep this meeting open for a little longer so that everybody has access to all the links. Amundsen High School has an LSC meeting on Tuesday, July 14th at 6 p.m., right? It's up to us to show up and demand that cops be pulled out of our local schools, right? Amundsen High School is in the 40th Ward. This is our responsibility. We need to use this moment and use this time to make sure that our voices are heard and not wasted. So the link is in the chat to join Amundsen's High School LSC meeting again. That's Tuesday, July 14th at 6 p.m. The link is also in the chat to join us, right? We're a local organization, and without you, there's no us, right? So we need you, we need your people power to come together and build mutual power. So come join us. Those links are in the chat as well. Again, I'm going to keep this meeting open so that everybody can make sure to get those links. I'm going to keep it open for at least the next 5 minutes. Thank you to everybody who came. Thank you to our guests, our panelists. We appreciate everybody, and thank you for showing up. Take care.